The suitcase was by the front door. The goodbye letter was on the kitchen counter. Maren Voss was supposed to be gone, but she had turned back for her mother's ring. She had taken it off tonight for the first time in 6 years, left it on the dresser as a kind of farewell, a severing of the last thread that tied her to this house. And now, walking back to retrieve it because she could not leave it behind after all, she stood frozen outside his study door, listening to a voice she thought she knew speak words that stopped her heart. The night her father died, she blamed the Koslovs. She blamed herself. She has never known I was the one holding the gun. The air in the hallway turned to ice. The floor beneath her tilted. But then he said something worse. If she ever learns the truth, she will leave me. And the moment she steps outside these gates, my own men will put a bullet in her. I am the only thing standing between my wife and a grave. And I cannot tell her. I cannot tell her that loving her has cost me everything, and that losing her will cost me more. 20 feet from the man she had married, Maren Voss realized two things at once. Her husband had killed her father, and he was the only reason she was still alive. The Voss estate sat on 11 acres at the edge of Harrowfield County, a property so private that most of the town had never seen the gates, let alone what lay beyond them. The house itself was a sprawling stone structure built in 1922 by a railroad magnate who died without heirs. It had changed hands 4 times before Stellan Voss acquired it, and in the 6 years since, he had made it into something both beautiful and impenetrable. The gardens were immaculate, the hedges trimmed with geometric precision. The windows were bulletproof, though they looked like ordinary glass. The security team moved in rotation so subtle that visitors rarely noticed them at all, mistaking the guards for groundskeepers and the surveillance for decoration. Inside, the rooms were furnished with the kind of taste that money could buy, but rarely did. Antique tables, hand-woven rugs, a library with floor-to-ceiling shelves that held first editions Maren had never seen Stellan read. Every detail spoke of control, of intention, of a man who left nothing to chance. But for Maren, the house had always felt like a museum. Beautiful, silent, and somehow, despite its warmth, always cold. She had walked these hallways for 6 years. She had eaten breakfast in the sunroom and dinner in the formal dining room and felt alone in both. She had slept beside a man who touched her gently but rarely spoke, who looked at her sometimes with an expression she could never name, and who left before dawn most mornings without explaining where he went. She had stopped asking years ago. Now, standing outside his study with her mother's ring still waiting on the dresser upstairs, she finally understood why. The house was not a home, it was a fortress. And she had never known what it was protecting her from. Maren Voss had been born Maren Caldwell, the only daughter of a man who owned a small shipping company, and a mother who had died when Maren was 17. Her father, Donovan Caldwell, had been a quiet man. Not cold, but reserved. The kind of father who showed love through presence rather than words. He had taught her to fish on Lake Brennan every summer. He had driven 4 hours to watch her graduate from nursing school. He had walked her down the aisle the day she married Stellan Voss. And 3 months later, he was dead. A robbery gone wrong. That was what the police had said. Her father had been in his office late at night. Someone had broken in. There was a struggle. A single gunshot. By the time the security guard found him, Donovan Caldwell was lying on the floor beside his desk with a hole in his chest and no pulse. The case went cold within 6 months. The Kozlov family, a rival organization that had been pressuring her father to use his shipping routes for their cargo, was suspected but never charged. Maren had spent 2 years drowning in grief and fury. And Stellan had been there through all of it. He had held her when she cried. He had hired private investigators when the police gave up. He had sat beside her at the gravesite on the anniversary of her father's death and said nothing, because he understood that nothing was sometimes the only right thing to say. She had loved him for that. She had loved him for his steadiness, his patience, his hands that never trembled, and his voice that never rose. She had mistaken his control for kindness, his silence for depth. It had taken her 4 years to realize she was lonely, and 2 more to realize she was trapped. The loneliness had crept in slowly, the way frost creeps across a window. First, the conversations grew shorter. Then the dinners grew quieter. Then the space between them widened into something neither of them acknowledged, but both of them felt. Stellan was gone more often and homeless, and when he was home, he was somewhere else entirely. His eyes looked at her but did not see her. His hands touched her but did not reach her. He was present in body and absent in every way that mattered. She had tried to talk to him. She had asked what was wrong. She had begged him once, on a night when the silence became unbearable, to just tell her something. Anything. To make her feel like she still existed inside his world. He had looked at her with those gray eyes, the ones that had once made her feel safe, and said 4 words that made no sense to her. "I am protecting you, Maren. That is all I know how to do." She had not understood. She had taken it as deflection. Another wall. Another door that closed before she could reach the handle. She stopped asking after that night, and something between them quietly died. Now she was 34 years old. Her hair was dark and fell past her shoulders, usually tied back, though tonight it hung loose because she had been too distracted to braid it. Her eyes were the color of honey in certain light and brown in others. She had a small scar on her left wrist from a childhood accident involving a glass door. And until tonight, she had worn her mother's ring on a chain around her neck every single day since her father's funeral, because it had always been too large for her fingers, and because keeping it close to her heart was the only way she knew to keep them both alive. Tonight she had taken it off, placed it on the dresser, told herself she was ready to leave everything behind, including the ghosts. She had been wrong. She was still beautiful. People told her so. But beauty felt irrelevant when you spent your nights alone in a bed made for 2. Beauty felt like a costume when the man who shared your name looked through you like you were made of glass. She had packed her suitcase 3 times in the past year. Each time she had unpacked it. Fear, perhaps. Habit, probably. The quiet hope that something might change if she waited long enough. But tonight had been different. Tonight she had finally done it. She had written the letter. She had called her sister in Veradale. She had told herself that leaving was not failure, that 6 years was long enough, that she deserved a life where someone truly saw her. And then she had walked out the front door, climbed into the car, and realized the ring was still on the dresser. The ring she had taken off as a symbol of goodbye. The ring she could not, in the end, leave behind. One small hesitation. One turn back toward the bedroom. One moment of passing his study at precisely the wrong time. And now Maren Voss stood in the hallway of a house she had never understood, listening to a confession she was never meant to hear. Realizing that the man she had called cold and distant had been quietly burning alive for 6 years, that he had killed her father, and that he had been dying to protect her ever since. 6 years ago, on a night when the rain fell in sheets against the windows of her father's office, Maren had been asleep in her apartment across town. She did not know that her father had received a visitor at 11:45. She did not know that the visitor had come alone, unarmed, and had asked for a conversation. She did not know that her father had poured 2 glasses of whiskey and sat across from the man who would become her husband, and said the words that changed everything. "I will not let you marry my daughter, and if you try, I will tell her exactly what you are." Stellan Voss had expected resistance. He had expected threats. He had expected Donovan Caldwell to be difficult because fathers were always difficult when men like Stellan came asking for their daughters. But he had not expected what came next. "I know what you did in Gresham," Donovan had said. "I know about the Baranova shipment. I know about the 17 men who disappeared. I know what kind of empire you have built, Voss. And I will burn it to the ground before I let Maren spend one more day in your world." Stellan had been still. He had learned stillness the way other men learned violence, as a survival skill, as a mask that hid what moved beneath. "She is already in my world," Stellan said quietly. "She has been since the moment I saw her. And I will protect her from it in ways you never could." Donovan had laughed. It was the laugh of a man who believed he held the winning hand. He reached for his phone. He said he had already sent the documents to his lawyer. He said the files would be released within 48 hours if anything happened to him. He said Stellan's empire would collapse, and Maren would finally see the monster she had agreed to marry. And then he said the words that sealed his fate. "I should have done this months ago, but I wanted to give her time to see it herself. She is too trusting, too soft. She does not understand what men like you do to women like her. You will consume her. You will use her. And when she has nothing left, you will discard her the way you discard everyone." Something in Stellan's chest had cracked. Not broken. Cracked. Because the accusation was not entirely wrong. He had consumed people. He had used them. He had built his empire on leverage and fear and the quiet elimination of obstacles. But Maren was different. Maren had been different from the moment he first heard her laugh at a charity gala, her head thrown back, her eyes bright, unaware that the most dangerous man in the room was watching her with something he had not felt in decades. Hope. She made him hope. And hope, for a man like Stellan, was the most dangerous thing of all. "I will not hurt her," Stellan said. Donovan shook his head. "You already have. You just do not know it yet." He reached for the phone. And Stellan, who had spent 30 years making impossible decisions, made one more. The gunshot was quiet. Stellan always used suppressors. Donovan fell backward in his chair with a hole in his chest and an expression of genuine surprise, as if he had believed until the very last second that his daughter's love would protect him. It had not. Stellan had stood over the body for a long time. He had looked at the phone, at the documents, at the face of the man who had tried to save his daughter from a fate he did not understand. And then Stellan had done something he had never done before. He wept. Not for Donovan. Not for the life he had taken. But for Maren. For the lie he would have to tell her. For the grief she would carry without ever knowing its true weight. For the distance he would have to maintain, year after year, so that she would never look too closely and see the blood on his hands. He cleaned the scene. He staged the robbery. He left no evidence that could ever be traced. And 3 days later, when Maren called him sobbing at 2 a.m, he had held her and stroked her hair and whispered that he was sorry, that he would find out who did this, that he would make them pay. He had lied to her face while her tears soaked his shirt. And he had been lying ever since. Maren did not remember walking away from the study door. She found herself in the upstairs bathroom with the door locked and her back pressed against the tile wall and her hands shaking so badly she could barely stand. The ring was still on the dresser, the ring that had belonged to her mother, the ring her father had given her mother on their wedding day, the ring that Maren had worn on a chain around her neck every day for 6 years, as a way of keeping both of them close to her heart. The ring she had finally taken off tonight because she thought she was ready to let go. Her father, whom Stellan had killed. Her mother, whom Maren had lost to cancer when she was 17. Both gone. Both ghosts. And now one of those ghosts had a face. Had hands she had let touch her. Had a voice that had whispered her name in the dark. She pressed her fist against her mouth to keep from screaming. "Think," she told herself. Think. But thinking was impossible. Her mind was a hurricane. Every memory she had of Stellan was being rewritten in real time. The way he had looked at her on their wedding day. The way he had held her at her father's funeral. The way he had said, "I am protecting you," with those gray eyes that she had once believed held depth, not deception. He had killed her father. He had held her while she grieved for a death he had caused. He had built their entire marriage on a foundation of blood and silence. And yet, "My own men will put a bullet in her." The words echoed in her skull. She had heard them clearly. Stellan's voice, steady as always, saying that the moment she stepped outside the gates, someone would kill her. Not him. His men. Which meant Stellan was not the one who wanted her dead. He was the one keeping her alive. But why? Why would his own organization want to kill her? What had she done? What did she know? Nothing. She knew nothing. She had spent 6 years deliberately not asking questions because she had understood, on some level she never examined, that the answers would destroy the fragile peace she had built. She had traded curiosity for comfort, ignorance for safety. And now ignorance was no longer an option. She looked at the bathroom door. Beyond it lay the hallway, the staircase, the front door where her suitcase still waited. She could leave. She could take the car, drive to her sister's house, and disappear into a life that did not include Stellan Voss. But she would not make it to the gates. She could stay. She could pretend she had heard nothing, unpack her suitcase, tear up her letter, and slide back into the silent marriage that had been suffocating her for years. But she would never be able to look at him again without seeing her father's face. She was trapped. Completely. Utterly trapped. The prison she had been trying to escape was the only place where she could survive. And the man she had called cold and distant was the warden who had been keeping her alive without ever telling her she was an inmate. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out with trembling hands and looked at the screen. A text from Stellan. "I found your letter. We need to talk. Do not leave the house." The phone slipped from her fingers and clattered against the tile. He knew she was still here. Stellan Voss stood in the kitchen with his wife's goodbye letter in his hands. He had read it 4 times. Each time the words cut deeper than the last. "I have loved you. I think I will always love you. But I cannot keep living beside a man who does not see me. I cannot keep waiting for a door that will never open. I am not leaving because I stopped caring. I am leaving because caring was never enough to reach you." He set the letter down on the counter and pressed both palms flat against the marble, steadying himself the way he steadied himself before every difficult decision. But this was not a decision. This was a reckoning. He had known she was unhappy. He had seen it in the way she stopped reaching for him at night. He had heard it in the silence that filled rooms she used to fill with laughter. He had felt it in the growing distance between their bodies, a distance he had created deliberately, carefully, because closeness meant risk, and risk meant exposure, and exposure meant death. Not his death, hers. From the moment he married Maren Caldwell, Stellan had understood that she was a liability. His enemies would use her. His allies would test him through her. His own organization, the men who had sworn loyalty to him but resented his obsession with a woman who brought no strategic value, would see her as weakness. And they had. In those early months of the marriage, there had been conversations, suggestions, quiet recommendations that the union was a mistake that could still be corrected. Stellan had ended those conversations permanently. He had made an example of 2 men who had spoken too freely, and he had restructured his entire operation to ensure that no one could touch Maren without going through him first. But the cost of that protection was isolation, distance. A wall between himself and the only person he had ever loved, built brick by brick from necessity and mortared with silence. He had convinced himself she was safer not knowing. He had told himself that her ignorance was a kindness, that the less she understood about his world, the less danger she would face if his enemies ever interrogated her. He had been lying to himself. The truth was simpler and uglier. He was afraid. Afraid that if Marin ever saw what he truly was, she would look at him the way she looked at headlines about violence and crime, with horror, with disgust, with the realization that she had shared a bed with a monster. So he had hidden. And in hiding, he had lost her anyway. His phone buzzed, a response to the text he had sent. "I am upstairs. I need a moment." He looked at the ceiling, imagining her somewhere above him, reading his message, deciding whether to come down or stay hidden. She had no idea what he had done to keep her breathing. She had no idea that her father had tried to destroy him. She had no idea that the letter in his hands was the most terrifying thing he had held in years, because it meant she was ready to walk through a door that would get her killed. He had built his entire empire on control, on anticipation, on knowing 3 moves ahead what his enemies would do. But he had never been able to control Marin. He had never been able to anticipate her. And that was why he loved her. That was why losing her would break him in ways no enemy ever could. He folded the letter carefully, placed it in his jacket pocket, and walked toward the stairs. Whatever came next, she would not face it alone, even if she did not want him there. Stellan Voss had not always been this. Once, he had been a boy named Stellan who lived in a 2-room apartment in the factory district of Culverin, a city 300 miles north of Harrowfield. His mother's name was Ilsa. She had pale hair and hands that were always cold, and a laugh that sounded like wind chimes when she was happy, which was not often. His father's name was Christoph. He had been a dock worker before the accident that crushed his left leg, and after that, he had been nothing but fury wrapped in skin. He drank. He raged. He broke things, furniture first, then dishes, then his wife. Stellan learned to read the weather of his father's moods before he learned to read books. He learned that certain footsteps meant hide. Certain silences meant run. Certain bottles meant his mother would not be able to stand up straight the next morning. He was 9 years old the first time he tried to stop it. His father had been hitting Ilsa in the kitchen, slamming her head against the edge of the counter while she made sounds that did not sound human. Stellan had grabbed a knife from the drawer and held it with both hands and screamed at his father to stop. Christoph had turned. He had looked at his son with something that might have been surprise, or might have been amusement, or might have been the first flicker of recognition that this boy would one day become dangerous. Then he had broken Stellan's arm in 2 places and locked him in the closet for 3 days. When Stellan came out, his mother had cleaned the blood from her face and braided her hair and smiled at him with a mouth that was still swollen. "We are fine," she had said. "Do not tell anyone, baby. We are fine." He had believed her because children believe their mothers. He had believed her until he was 14, when he came home from school and found her lying at the bottom of the staircase with her neck at an angle that necks were not supposed to bend. An accident, the police said. She must have fallen. But Stellan had seen the bruises on her wrists. He had seen the way his father stood at the funeral with his hands in his pockets, and his face arranged into grief that did not reach his eyes. He had seen the truth that no one else wanted to see. And he had promised himself, standing beside his mother's grave with rain soaking through his thin jacket, that he would never be powerless again. He had kept that promise. He had built an empire on the bones of that promise. He had acquired wealth, influence, fear. He had surrounded himself with men who answered to him and only him. He had eliminated everyone who threatened what he had built, including the rivals who murdered his first mentor, including the politicians who tried to expose him, including the father-in-law who had threatened to take away the only person who made him feel human. Donovan Caldwell had not been an innocent man. His shipping company had been laundering money for the Koslov family for years. He had known exactly what kind of world his daughter was marrying into. And when he realized that Stellan would never be controlled the way the Kozlovs had controlled him, he had tried to burn everything down rather than lose his leverage. Stellan had not wanted to kill him. He had spent weeks trying to find another way. But Donovan had forced his hand, and men like Stellan did not survive by hesitating when force was required. Still, he had never forgiven himself, not because Donovan deserved forgiveness. He did not. But because Maren had loved her father, and every time Stellan looked at her, every time he watched her touch the ring on the chain around her neck, he saw the grief he had caused, and the lie he was living, and the distance he had created to keep her from seeing the blood that would never wash off his hands. He had told himself he was protecting her. But standing at the bottom of the stairs now, looking up toward the hallway where his wife was hiding, he finally admitted the truth he had been avoiding for 6 years. He had not been protecting her. He had been protecting himself. From the moment she would look at him and finally see the monster her father had warned her about, Maren heard his footsteps on the stairs. She had moved from the bathroom to the bedroom, her back against the wall beside the window, her eyes fixed on the door. The suitcase was still downstairs. The letter was in his pocket. The ring still lay on the dresser where she had left it. And somewhere between them was a truth that could not be unsaid. He knocked. Soft, deliberate. The knock of a man who was asking permission, not demanding entry. Maren, his voice came through the door. I am not going to open this unless you let me. Her throat was dry. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her temples. She wanted to scream at him. She wanted to throw something. She wanted to run at the door and beat her fists against it until her hands bled. But she did none of those things, because beneath the rage and the grief and the betrayal, there was something else. Something she did not want to feel, but could not stop feeling. The need to understand. Why had he done it? Why had he married her? Why had he spent 6 years building walls instead of telling her the truth? Why had his voice, through the study door, sounded like a man in agony when he said that losing her would cost him more than anything? She needed answers. And the only person who had them was standing on the other side of that door. Come in, she said. The handle turned, the door opened, and there he was. Stellan Voss, her husband, the man who had killed her father, the man who was apparently the only reason she was still alive. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, with those gray eyes that gave nothing away, with that face that had been carved by a sculptor who did not believe in softness, with that stillness that she had once mistaken for control and now recognized as something closer to restraint. But there was something different tonight, something cracked in the mask, a tremor at the edge of his jaw, a tightness around his eyes that she had never seen before. He was afraid. The realization hit her like cold water. In 6 years of marriage, she had never once seen Stellan Voss afraid. She had seen him face down business rivals and government officials and men who carried weapons in their jackets. She had seen him receive phone calls that made other men pale and respond with nothing but calm instructions. But now, standing in the doorway of their bedroom with her goodbye letter in his pocket, he was afraid. Of her. Of losing her. Of whatever she was about to say. You found the letter, she said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. Yes. And you told me not to leave the house. Yes. Why? Because if you leave, you will die. The words hung in the air between them, simple, direct, delivered without drama or embellishment. Maren stared at him. Your men. You said your own men would put a bullet in me. Something flickered in his eyes. You heard that? I came back from my mother's ring. I was passing your study. Silence. Long. Heavy. Then Stellan exhaled slowly, the way a man exhales when he has been holding his breath for years and finally accepts that the holding is over. How much did you hear? Enough. She swallowed. You killed my father. He did not deny it. He did not flinch. He met her eyes and said the word she had been dreading and expecting in equal measure. Yes. Marin's legs gave out. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor with her knees pulled up and her hands pressed against her face. The sound that came out of her was not a scream. It was smaller than that. Quieter. The sound of something inside her that had been hoping, against all evidence that she had misheard. She had not misheard. Stellan took a step toward her. She held up one hand. Do not come near me. He stopped. He stood there, 3 feet away, his hands at his sides, his face stripped of everything except the thing he had been hiding for 6 years. Pain. It was written across his features like a language she had never learned to read. The pain of watching her crumble. The pain of knowing he had caused it. The pain of finally being seen for what he was, and understanding that what he was might be unforgivable. You have every right to hate me, he said quietly. You have every right to never speak to me again. But before you decide what happens next, I need you to know the truth. All of it. Not just the part you heard through the door. Marin looked up at him. Her eyes were wet. Her chest was heaving. Why should I believe anything you say? Because I have never lied to you. I have hidden things. I have kept things from you. But every word I have ever spoken to you has been true. I told you I would protect you. I have. I told you I loved you. I do. I told you I would never let anyone hurt you. He paused. His voice dropped. I never told you that I was the one you needed protection from. And for that, I am sorry. I am sorrier than I know how to say. They sat on the floor of the bedroom, not touching, not close, but not on opposite sides of the room either. Somewhere in between, somewhere that left space for words to travel. Stellan told her everything. He told her about his childhood in Culverin, about Kristoff and Ilsa, about the closet and the broken arm and the day he found his mother at the bottom of the stairs. He told her about the promise he had made to himself at 14, standing in the rain beside a grave, swearing that he would never be powerless again. He told her about the empire he had built. Not in detail, not with names and dates that would make her complicit, but in broad strokes. The violence, the fear, the things he had done to survive, and then the things he had done to thrive. And then the things he had done because stopping felt impossible once you had gone that far. He told her about the night he first saw her. A charity gala for a hospital foundation. She had been standing by the window with a glass of champagne, laughing at something a friend had said, completely unaware that she was being watched. And he had felt something shift inside him. Something he had walled off years ago. Something that felt dangerous precisely because it felt like hope. He told her about their courtship, how every dinner, every phone call, every slow step toward intimacy had been shadowed by the knowledge that he was pulling her into a world she did not understand. How he had told himself he would walk away. How he had tried once and lasted 4 days before he called her again. He told her about her father. Donovan Caldwell had not been the man she thought he was. He had spent 15 years using his shipping routes to move money for the Kozlov organization. He had been complicit in operations that had left bodies in harbors and warehouses across 3 states. He had smiled at family dinners while men were being killed on boats that bore his company's name. When Donovan realized his daughter was falling in love with a man whose empire was larger than the Kozlovs and whose loyalty could not be bought, he had panicked. He had tried to use his knowledge of Stellan's operations as leverage. He had threatened to expose everything unless Stellan ended the relationship. And when Stellan refused, Donovan had made good on his threat. He had called the Kozlovs. He had offered them a trade, Stellan's secrets in exchange for their protection, a new alliance that would cut Stellan out entirely and position Donovan as the middleman for a reorganized operation. But the Kozlovs had made a different calculation. They had decided that Donovan was a liability. that his desperation made him unpredictable, that killing him and framing Stellan would solve two problems at once. They had sent a man to Donovan's office that night, a man who was supposed to pull the trigger and leave evidence that pointed to Stellan's organization. But Stellan had found out. He had his own sources inside the Kozlov network, and he had gotten there first. "I did not kill your father to protect myself," Stellan said. His voice was raw, stripped of the control that usually armored it. "I killed him because if I did not, the Kozlovs would have killed him and then killed you. They would have made it look like a murder-suicide, a grief-stricken daughter who could not live without her father. It was already planned. I saw the documents. I saw the timeline." Marin was shaking. Whether from cold or shock or something else, she did not know. "You could have told me," she whispered. "You could have warned me. We could have run." "Run where?" Stellan's eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. "There is nowhere on Earth the Kozlovs cannot reach. Nowhere my own organization cannot reach. The only way to keep you safe was to keep you here, inside these walls, under my protection, where no one could touch you without going through me first. But your own men, you said they want me dead. Not all of them, but enough." He exhaled. "When I married you, I broke an unwritten rule. Men in my position do not marry for love. They marry for alliance, for strategy, for bloodlines that strengthen the organization. You brought none of those things. You were a vulnerability, a weakness they could exploit. And they tried. More than once in those first months. I handled it. But the resentment never went away. It just went underground. There are men in my organization who believe that if you were gone, I would become what I was before. Focused, ruthless, uncompromised. They do not understand that you are the only reason I am still human." He looked at her with an expression that broke something inside her chest. "If you walk out that door, I cannot protect you. I can try. I can send men. I can build walls around you wherever you go. But eventually, someone will find a gap. Someone will get through. And I will spend the rest of my life knowing that I failed the only promise that ever mattered." Marin closed her eyes. The tears came then. Not the quiet tears she had cried in the bathroom. These were the tears of a woman whose entire understanding of her life had been dismantled in a single hour. Her father had not been innocent. Her husband had not been cold. Her marriage had not been a slow death. It had been a slow rescue, and she had been too blind to see it. "I thought you did not love me anymore," she said. Her voice cracked. "I thought you had grown tired of me. I thought I was invisible to you." Stellan moved closer, slowly, carefully. "The way you approach someone who might shatter. You have never been invisible to me." He reached out and took her hand. His fingers were warm, solid, trembling slightly. "Every morning I wake up and look at you and feel terrified that today will be the day you realize what I am. Every night I lie beside you and listen to you breathe and pray to a God I do not believe in, that I will get one more day, one more hour, one more minute of this life that I do not deserve, but cannot give up." His thumb traced a circle on her palm. "I built walls because I was afraid, not of my enemies, of you. Of the moment you would look at me and see the blood I have spilled and the lives I have taken and the man your father tried to warn you about. I thought if I kept you at a distance, it would hurt less when you finally left." He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss against her knuckles. "I was wrong. The distance did not protect me. It just meant I lost you slowly instead of all at once." Marin looked at their joined hands, at the ring still waiting on the dresser, at the man she had married and mourned and misunderstood. "I do not know how to forgive you," she said. "I am not asking you to." "Then what are you asking?" "For time." He met her eyes. for the chance to tell you every truth I have hidden, for the chance to show you who I am without the walls. And when you have seen everything, all of it, the worst of it, you can decide whether you want to stay or go. If you choose to go, I will find a way to protect you from the outside. I will dismantle everything I have built if that is what it takes. But I will not let you die. Not for my mistakes. Not for my sins. Not for anything. Marin was silent for a long time. The room grew darker as the sun set outside the window. Neither of them moved to turn on a light. Finally, she spoke. You said I was the only reason you were still human. Yes. What does that mean? It means that before you, I did not care whether I lived or died. It means that I built my empire out of rage and survival, not purpose. It means that the first time you smiled at me, I felt something I had not felt since I was 9 years old, and I still believed my mother when she said we were fine. What did you feel? Hope? He said the word like it was fragile, like speaking it too loudly might break it. I felt hope that maybe I could be something other than what I had become. Maybe I could deserve something good. Maybe the boy who was locked in the closet could grow into a man who protected people instead of hurting them. He paused. I have not lived up to that hope. I have done terrible things. But you made me want to try. And that is more than anyone else has ever given me. The next morning, Stellan made a call. He sat at his desk in the study, the same study where Marin had heard his confession, and he called a man named Theron Malik. Theron had been with him for 18 years. He was not the kind of man who appeared in photographs or attended public functions. He was the kind of man who made problems disappear quietly, efficiently, and without leaving traces. He was also the only person in Stellan's organization who knew the full truth about Donovan Caldwell. We are restructuring, Stellan said. I want every man who has spoken against my wife identified, every conversation, every whisper. I want names, and I want them by tonight. Theron did not ask why. He never asked why. By midnight, Stellan had a list. 14 names. Some he had suspected. Others surprised him. 2 were men he had trusted with his life. He did not hesitate. Over the following week, those 14 men were reassigned to operations in distant cities, or removed from the organization entirely, or in 3 cases, simply vanished. Stellan did not enjoy it. He had never enjoyed violence for its own sake. But he understood that mercy was a language his enemies did not speak, and hesitation was a weakness that would get Marin killed. When it was done, he came home and found her sitting in the library with a cup of tea that had gone cold. It is finished, he said. The men who wanted you gone are no longer a threat. Marin looked at him. She had not slept well in days. There were shadows under her eyes and a tension in her shoulders that would not release. How many? She asked. 14. And what happened to them? They are no longer part of my world. She set down the cup. The porcelain clinked against the saucer. I need to know what that means, Stellan. He sat across from her. He did not lie. 3 of them are dead. The others have been relocated or dismissed. They will not trouble you again. Marin absorbed this. He watched her face, waiting for the horror, the revulsion, the moment she would finally see him clearly and turn away. It did not come. Instead, she asked a question that surprised him. Would you have done this before? If I had never heard your conversation? If I had simply left with my suitcase and my letter? Yes. He did not hesitate. The moment you walked through those gates, I would have activated every resource I have. I would have sent Theron. I would have dismantled my own organization piece by piece to keep you alive. The only difference is that now you know. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something he had not expected. I want to meet Theron. Why? Because if he is the one who will be protecting me, I want to look him in the face. I want to know who he is. I want to stop being a woman who hides from the truth and start being a woman who faces it. Stellan studied her. There was something new in her eyes, something that had not been there a week ago. It was not forgiveness. It was not trust. It was something deeper and more difficult to define: resolution. She had decided something. He did not know what. But he understood that Maren Caldwell Voss was no longer the woman who waited in beautiful rooms for explanations that never came. She was becoming something else. I will arrange a meeting, he said. Maren met Theron Malik on a Tuesday afternoon in the garden behind the main house. He was not what she expected. She had imagined someone cold, someone with dead eyes and a mouth that never smiled. Instead, she found a man in his late 40s with silver at his temples and a calm demeanor that reminded her, strangely, of her nursing instructors from years ago. Patient, observant, unhurried. Mrs. Voss, he said, inclining his head. Maren. He paused, considered, then nodded. Maren. They walked together along the gravel path that wound through the rose beds. The autumn air was crisp. Leaves fell in slow spirals from the oak trees at the edge of the property. My husband says you have been with him for 18 years. That is correct. And you know everything. About my father, about the Kozlovs, about the men who wanted me dead. I do. Maren stopped walking. She turned to face him. Why did you stay? Knowing what he is, what he has done. Why did you give him 18 years of your life? Theron was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was measured but not mechanical. There was something human in it, something she had not expected. Because I knew his mother. The words hit Maren like a wave. You knew Ilsa? I grew up 3 buildings away from their apartment in Culverin. I was 17 when she died. I watched Stellan stand at her grave in the rain with no umbrella and no one beside him. I watched him make a promise to himself that day. And I have watched him keep that promise ever since. He looked at the rose beds. His expression softened slightly. He is not a good man. He would be the first to tell you that. But he is a man who has tried, in his own way, to become better than what made him. Most people do not try. Most people accept the darkness they were born into and pass it on to the next generation. Stellan refused. He built walls instead of weapons. He chose protection instead of destruction. And when he found you, he chose love over power. He turned back to Maren. That is why I stayed, because I believe that what we choose matters more than what we are born into. And Stellan Voss has chosen, every day for 6 years, to be a man who protects his wife, even when she did not know she needed protecting, even when it cost him the closeness he wanted most. Maren felt something shift inside her. A piece of the anger that had been lodged in her chest began to loosen. She did not forgive Stellan. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. But she understood him now in a way she had not before. And understanding was the first step toward something she was only beginning to recognize. Over the following weeks, Maren began to change. She stopped retreating to the guest room at night. She started eating dinner with Stellan in the formal dining room, then in the smaller breakfast nook, then eventually in the kitchen, while he cooked meals she had never known he could make. She asked questions about his work, not the details, but the shape of it, the weight of it, and the cost. And he answered. Every question, without deflection, without walls. She learned that he had donated millions to domestic violence shelters across 6 states. She learned that he had funded scholarships for children who had grown up in homes like his. She learned that for all the terrible things he had done, he had also done things that mattered, things that helped, things that proved. The boy who had made a promise at his mother's grave had not been entirely consumed by the man he became. It was not enough to erase what he had done. Nothing would ever be enough for that. But it was enough to make her stay. 3 months later, on a January afternoon so clear the sky looked like blue glass, Maren stood in the garden where she had met Theron and watched the groundskeeper plant a new rose bush beneath the oak tree. It was a variety called Ilse's Memory. She had ordered it from a specialty nursery in Belgium. It had taken 6 weeks to arrive. Stellan stood beside her. He did not speak. He did not need to. Over the past 3 months, something had changed between them. The walls had come down, not all at once, but brick by brick, conversation by conversation, truth by truth. He had told her about every operation he had ever run, every decision he had ever made, every life he had taken, and every life he had spared. He had opened himself completely, without defense, without excuse, and he had let her see the man he was beneath the armor. She had wept. She had raged. She had spent 2 weeks in a guest room because she could not bear to sleep beside him. And then, slowly, she had returned. Not because she had forgiven him. Forgiveness was a word that still felt too large, too complete, and too final. But because she had realized something in those 2 weeks alone. She loved him. Not the version of him she had imagined during their courtship. Not the distant stranger she had lived with for 6 years. Not the monster her father had warned her about. She loved the man who had learned to read his father's footsteps as a child. She loved the man who had been locked in a closet for 3 days and emerged still trying to protect his mother. She loved the man who had wept over her father's body, not for Donovan, but for her. She loved the man who had built an empire and a fortress and 1,000 walls, all to keep one woman safe. She loved him because he had chosen her, over and over again, in every decision, every sacrifice, every silent year of distance that had been designed to protect her, even as it broke his own heart. That kind of love was not clean. It was not simple. It did not fit into the boxes that romantic stories provided, but it was real, and real was enough. The groundskeeper finished planting the rosebush and stepped back. The soil was dark and fresh. The plant was small but healthy, its leaves a deep green that promised blooms in the spring. "Your mother would have liked this garden," Maren said softly. Stellan looked at the rosebush. His jaw tightened. "She would have liked you," he said. "She would have seen you clearly, the way she saw everyone." Maren reached over and took his hand. It was the first time she had initiated contact in 3 months. He looked down at their joined fingers. When he looked back up, his eyes were bright. "Does this mean?" he started. "It means I am staying." She squeezed his hand. "It means I am choosing to see you. All of you. The boy who was locked in the closet, the man who built an empire, the husband who loves me so much he nearly lost me trying to protect me." She stepped closer, close enough to feel his breath on her face. "It means I am not running. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever. But it also means no more walls. No more secrets. No more distance. If we are going to do this, we do it together. Both of us." Eyes open. Stellan lifted his free hand and cupped her face. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone. His eyes held hers with an intensity that had nothing to do with control and everything to do with hope. "Together," he said, eyes open. She rose onto her toes and kissed him. Softly at first, then deeper. A kiss that acknowledged the past and reached toward the future. A kiss that said, "I see you, and I am still here." When they pulled apart, the sun was beginning to set. The sky had turned from blue to gold to something in between. Maren looked at the rosebush one last time. Ilse's memory. A small thing planted in dark soil. A promise that some things could grow even after everything had been burned away. She reached up and touched the chain around her neck. The ring was back where it belonged. Not as a symbol of goodbye, but as a reminder of everyone she had loved and lost and chosen to carry forward. She turned toward the house. Stellan walked beside her. Their shoulders touched. The deadbolt on the front door waited for them, ready to lock against a world that was still dangerous, still unpredictable, and still full of men who would hurt them if they could. But inside those walls, something new had taken root. Something that looked like truth. Something that felt like beginning. Something that, for the first time in 6 years, both of them were willing to call by its real name. Love. Not the love of fairy tales. Not the love of simple stories. But the love of two people who had seen each other's worst and chosen to stay anyway. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.